and welcome to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Now today we're talking about wildlife and the money. Now to any country, the performance of its economy is hugely important. The show today centers on the link between economics and the wildlife trade and what impact it has on the economy. And this is why it's so important. So what's the connection between economics and wildlife? Well, the global illegal wildlife trade is worth between 15 billion and 25 billion US dollars. It's a lucrative business that's fast growing by the day, with poachers going to extremes to make a quick buck. The trade is driven by demand from mostly Asian countries, but is having catastrophic effects on some of the world's most iconic species, such as the African elephant and rhino. Elephant tusks and rhino horn can fetch up to millions of dollars on the black market. In the month of March alone, tusks worth millions of shillings have been seized by suspected traffickers in Kenya, including policemen. The latest incident is the recovery of almost 40 pieces of elephant tusks in Githurai, Nairobi on the 22nd of March 2016. But while some unscrupulous businessmen are benefiting from the ivory trade, the quick, dirty money gained from it means numerous species are facing extinction, and the loss of this wildlife is likely to have a devastating effect on the economies of several countries by impacting development opportunities and various economic sectors, a situation that many countries simply cannot afford to face. I'm now at the Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters here at the Safari Walk, and joining me for a conversation about endangered species and the economics of wildlife trafficking is Patrick Omondi. He is the Deputy Director in charge of Species Management at the Kenya Wildlife Service. Dr. Winnie Kiru, she is the head of the country liaison for Stop Ivory, and also Alejandro Nadal. He is a professor of economics at the College of Mexico. Thank you all so much for joining us on NTV Wild Talk. Remember, you can join this conversation. The hashtag is NTV Wild. You can also join our Facebook page, NTV Wild. Alejandro, illegal wildlife trafficking and trade in endangered species is booming business worth billions and billions of dollars. What is so attractive about the business?
Well, what I would immediately, as an economist, I would tell you, production costs are very low. So if I can get my hands on a piece of commodity or on something that I will make a commodity, and the only cost is to pick it up from the sand, okay, and then I know there is a market, or I can develop a market, because people always say there is a market. Sometimes there's not even a market, but I will develop it. Okay, you know, the saying is, people don't know what they need until you show them what they need. Okay, so I will pick this up. The cost of production is very low, and I will develop the market, and I will sell, so I will get a big profit. So that is one very important reason. And the other one that goes with this one is that today we live in a crisis, in a global economic crisis. So profit rates on, you name it, anything are going down. So this is an area where I can make a cheap buck very rapidly.
So clearly there's a lot of money in this industry, but Winnie, this has consequences. It is threatening to wipe out some animal populations, various species. One of these populations at threat is our African elephants. Tell us more about the threat.
I think that historically, if we look at the numbers, the elephant numbers, I think the most reliable figures we have are in the early 70s, where we can say in Africa we had close to 1.7 million elephants. We probably had a lot more earlier, but the numbers we have are for the early 70s. Today, we're talking about 300,000, maybe 400,000. Again, we're guessing. We don't even know how many. But what is clear is that the reduction in numbers is phenomenal. The reasons are many, but most important is the illegal trade, which drives poaching. We in Africa are those countries that produce large numbers of wildlife, and yet we are losing them to countries that can afford to buy these products. They are creating the demand, and we can do very little to stop that demand. And so our species are disappearing, our rhinos are almost gone, our elephants are going, and so really the equation is totally stepped against us.
Patrick, someone might ask, so what? What impact do these elephants and rhinos, for example, have on the Kenyan economy? Yes, they're beautiful creatures to look at, but so what if we're losing them?
Not only on Kenyan's economy, I think elephants play a significant role in the African economy. Tourism drives most of African nations' economy, and elephants is one of the species that constitute the wildlife tourism. For example, in Kenya, tourism contributes a significant percentage to our GDP, and wildlife contributes 70% of that contribution. So if you kill an elephant, you are actually killing the economy of many nations. So the illegal trafficking, as Professor Alexandra has mentioned, is actually driving not only the elephants across the continent to extinction, but also is killing the economy of many African nations. And if we stop the appetite, the demand for ivory, I think that is where we'll be able to solve the problem of poaching and stop the extinction of the African elephants.
I think even beyond economics, elephants, rhinos have a great role to play in our biodiversity. The balance, elephants are a keystone species. When we lose them, we are losing their important contribution in our ecosystems. So we're saying that elephants, if we can conserve elephants, we can conserve everything else. They are important agents for seed dispersal. They are important agents of clearing areas for other smaller wildlife to thrive. They are important agents of recycling nutrients in our ecosystems. And so when we lose elephants, we are not just losing their economic value, we are also losing their huge contribution to the maintenance of our ecosystems. So the equation just doesn't go the wrong way in terms of economics. It's also biologically we are losing a really important keystone species.
I think this is really crucial, that the discussion on driving a species to extinction is not only and should not only be an economic issue or question. You can take that angle, and I'm an economist, so I can study and look at the implications of these things. But certainly, and Winnie, you're absolutely right, this is the immensity of the problem in terms of environment for me, is that the extinction of elephants, for example, or rhinos, for me is a comparable phenomenon to climate change. For me, because we are already in a process of massive extinction. The only difference with other massive extinctions, or mass extinctions as biologists call them, is that now we know who's driving this mass extinction. It's us. So from that perspective, this is as big as climate change, and we need to understand that that is what we're really talking about when we talk about wildlife trade as a driver of loss of biodiversity and extinction. So, coming from an economist, that's a strange thing, because most economists will say, no, let's look at the dollar values. But these creatures and this part of the ecosystem and the environment are priceless. This is one thing we need to keep in our minds. We're not talking about commodities. We're talking about our home.
Of course. Patrick, are you essentially saying that Kenya as a country has more to lose than to gain from the wildlife trade?
Yes, and I think the position of the country has been very clear, but in regard to elephants, ivory, and the rhino horn. that the rhino horn and elephant ivory are better off being in the elephant itself. Once it is out, it is valueless for us. And as Professor said, we've been unable to put a price to our elephants, for example, because we feel it is a natural resource. Elephants, for example, are social animals. You live closer to them, they are just like us, human beings. And if somebody is killing it just to get a commodity that is not medicine, then it beats logic. So as a country, we believe trading in elephant ivory and rhino horn has no value into the conservation of this precious natural resource. And it's remained our position, and it's been our position since the CITES was invented.
Yeah, we'll come to CITES
Yes.
in just a moment. Winnie, do you agree that we shouldn't quantify the value of a species?
If we have to quantify, we have to throw everything into the basket. I'm not an economist, and I'm probably not even qualified to talk about value, but I think that you cannot speak of the value of an elephant without, as Patrick has said, it's a social animal. It's a sentient being. It is. It's taken millions of years to evolve to what it is. So if we're going to talk about value, the basket needs to hold everything. Because if we just put an economic value to wildlife, to elephants for that matter, or any other species, then I think we're doing an injustice which will cause us to be judged very harshly by the generations that will come after us.
Conservation is a land use, just like you do agriculture, you do infrastructure development, livestock production.
Sure.
And for us, putting a value to a natural resource, let's say within Nairobi National Park, we have rhinos, we have giraffes, lions, call it. And they're competing land use that will it be better to have development and housing in Nairobi National Park and get rid of the huge biodiversity resource that is there. If you try to work it out, and I think Professor will chip in into it, I think Mexico has tried to value their biodiversity. It's a chain, you see, like if a tourist comes, the airline gains,
Right.
the hotel industry gains, it creates employment. It is a livelihood to many communities. So it has endless value apart from just being a natural asset. So that is why it gets so difficult to put a value to it, because you'll have to do a lot of analysis. I don't know how Mexico values their biological resources, but it's something good, because if you have competing land use, do you want to put infrastructure? Do you want to allow us to have the parks? Then you need to kind of work on all these chains.
Right.
Employment, hotel industry, the airlines, and all. And then the just satisfaction of having nature,
Of course.
and the beauty of where we are sitting on.
All right, there's
Yes.
plenty more to discuss. We are about to take a short break, but before we do that, here is your chance to win a fabulous prize. It's time for our Wild Guess question. On Wild Guess, we ask, what percentage does wildlife contribute to Kenya's GDP? What percentage does wildlife contribute to Kenya's GDP? You can post your answer using the hashtag NTVWild on Twitter, or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer there. The first person to answer correctly wins a meal voucher for two for up to 4,000 shillings at Mambo Italia, an Italian restaurant at the Garden City Mall, plus one bottle of wine, courtesy of Wines of the World, and a gift hamper, courtesy of Wildlife Direct. This is NTV Wild Talk, coming to you from the Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters, the Safari Walk. It's time for a break. Remember, you can join this conversation. The hashtag is NTV Wild. You can also follow us on Facebook, like our NTV Wild Facebook page. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to NTV Wild Talk. The hashtag is NTV Wild and you can like our Facebook page, NTV Wild. Before we continue the discussion, a reminder of our Wild Guess question. On Wild Guess, we ask, what percentage does wildlife contribute to Kenya's GDP? What percentage does wildlife contribute to Kenya's GDP? You can post your answer using the hashtag NTV Wild on Twitter or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer there. The first person to answer correctly wins a meal voucher for two for up to 4,000 shillings at Mambo Italia, an Italian restaurant at the Garden City Mall, plus one bottle of wine, courtesy of Wines of the World, and a gift hamper, courtesy of Wildlife Direct. My conversation now continues with Patrick, Winnie and Alejandro. Thanks very much for staying with me. Alejandro, there is a big argument that the sale of wildlife products could essentially depress prices and therefore reduce the demand. So should there be a legal or controlled trade in wildlife products?
Things are not as simple or as transparent as the argument would have you believe. The first thing to know is that there is no reason why an increase in supply will bring the price down. This is textbook economics will say that sort of thing, but in the real world you don't see that. That depends on the structure of the market. So you may have, if I produce, I don't know, toothpaste, for example, and all of a sudden I have a new source of supply for one of the basic inputs in the toothpaste I produce. Do you think I have an interest in transferring that lower cost to the consumer? Maybe not. Maybe I will pocket those extra rents for myself. But it all depends, because maybe he has another company and he will compete with me. So, you know, this idea that the price will go down depends on the pattern of competition, depends on the structure of the market. Okay, so that is the initial thing. And then the second one is, are you sure you're going to be putting the bad guys out of business? Well, it all depends. It all depends on the levels of profitability that they are using and on their capacity to resist a price war. Because what I'm saying here really when you say that the price will go down is that you are detonating a price war against the incumbent firms. So the incumbent firms meaning the cartels or the crime syndicates in the illegal trade. Okay, well maybe they don't have any capacity to wage a price war with me. But maybe, because they may be producing other things, for example, right, maybe they have the capability of resisting a price war for a longer period of time. And in that case, I'm going to be endangering the species which we're talking about. Because now we have a longer horizon in which I am in a war within this market, you know, between the legal and the illegal components. And I don't know what's going to be happening to the rhinos or the elephants or the buffaloes or whatever the species we're talking about.
So really, there's no simple yes or no answer to that question.
Exactly.
Sometimes you talk about the ivory trade as if it does not exist. You know, we think that it was banned. It doesn't. There is a thriving domestic ivory trade. If today you go to Thailand or you go to China, you can walk into a shop and buy, God forbid if these beads were ivory, but they're not. You can go to China and buy ivory beads. Right? You can go to Thailand and buy beads. And what that market is doing, it's driving the poaching that we're seeing now. And in fact, we've got instruments like the Elephant Protection Initiative that say close domestic ivory markets. Why are we saying this? It's because we have seen already, even without knowledge of economics, we know there's a relationship between this market and what is going on. And Patrick will tell you, we're losing men who are trying to protect elephants. We are losing elephants, we're losing other species as elephants are getting killed. The same happens with rhino. If you go to Vietnam, you can probably buy some powder that's going to convince the men that they will do things better if they have it.
Sure.
And you know, the market is alive, and we need to recognize sometimes those people buying the products also don't know the relationship between that product and the animals. There are people in China who think that elephants drop their tusks around like teeth, and you can pick them up and go make beads and sell them. So those domestic markets need to close. And it's great that now we are getting to hear world leaders, President Obama, the Prime Minister of China, Hong Kong, saying that they are going to close the domestic ivory market. But going to is not good enough. Close them.
That's
Patrick,
right. Absolutely.
CITES plays a big role in making some of these decisions as to whether or not legal trade should take place or not. What informs the decisions?
We rely on the biology and the status, let's say, of elephants and rhinos. But sometimes I think our decisions are politically driven. And I want to get back to Prof on the issue of whether we have an answer, whether legalizing trade, for example, in elephant ivory will stimulate illegal trade. And to give practical examples, we had a total ban in 1989. All elephants in Africa and Asia were put on Appendix 1 of CITES. And immediately we saw a reduction in the prices of ivory in the black market. And we saw a reduction in poaching because there was no market. Nobody allowed to trade internationally. And we saw our population recover. From, for example, Kenya, our population had been reduced from almost 160,000 to 16,000 by the time of the ban. And we saw this recovery starting to take place. In 2000, there was a request from 3 states in Southern Africa to allow a one-off sale of their stocks, you know, so that they can get money. That's where economics comes in.
Exactly.
To plow back to community livelihoods, to help them in elephant conservation and management. And we were against that decision in 2000. We said if you feed in the market the way the top economist is saying, you'll create a window for laundering. And I think CITES never listened, and that decision was done.
Why
And
did CITES never listen?
I think CITES is parties, and it goes through a vote system. You are able to garner a 75 majority, just like an election. You take the day.
Well, Professor, did those countries have a valid reason in saying that by selling their ivory stockpiles, their economies would thrive?
I don't think they had a valid reason for 2 reasons. One of them is, first of all, the amount of money you generate is very small. We're talking about livelihoods of how many million people, and livelihoods over which time horizon, and how many $1 million are we talking about? This is peanuts. This is not how economies work. This is not how you get development. You know, if as an economist concerned with development questions and development policies and macroeconomics, to think that wildlife will provide the basis for development is absolutely madness. This is no country in the world ever developed itself through its, selling wildlife. Nobody ever did that.
And you can't, for example, improve community livelihood by selling ivory. In Kenya, for example, we have communities benefiting from wildlife tourism, the community conservancies.
Right.
Tourism thrives in most of African countries. Again, economics. You take the value of selling ivory, it's not much.
Absolutely.
But you sell, then you create a window for laundering. It doesn't make sense. And I will like Professor whether it makes economic sense
No, not at
to
all.
sell ivory.
Absolutely.
And you are selling ivory to make cosmetics. People, human beings, humankind can do without.
Absolutely.
And you are selling it and driving communities to be killed, elephants to go into extinction. It doesn't make sense.
Let's understand that from our countries, we are selling the raw material.
Exactly.
We see these figures in the paper. They say a kilo of ivory is $750. First of all, that's a black market figure. Number two, we, the producers, are never gonna get that kind of money.
Of course.
It's the end of the value chain. It's when they take it and make it into this intricate little beads. I'll use my beads as an example again, sadly. But you know, it's when they make the products that they actually make that money. So there's a fallacy from our countries when we read in the paper the black market prices, and we think that those prices are available to us. They are not.
They are not.
They are not. We are chopping down a tree and selling the wood. Somebody is going to make beds, and the bed costs more than the wood.
That's right.
And we need to understand that we're at the bottom of the value chain.
That's right.
So how can we reduce demand? There's a huge disconnect in those countries that want the ivory. There's a whole public, like Alejandro has said, it's not everybody who's involved, but those who want the ivory, some of them have no idea where ivory comes from. They've got myths, oh, it's teeth, or elephants gift this ivory to us, they drop it down and give it to us. No, we need to educate. Education is important. Policy, international policy is important. Domestic policy in those countries is important. And then we need, from Africa, like we've said, we've got instruments that bring together political will at the highest level. So we've got, in the next few months, the summit by the Giants Club. We've got instruments like the Elephant Protection Initiative that now bring in presidential level interaction with this issue. So our presidents are now talking about our natural resources, our ivory. They're going to talk about it at the UN General Assembly. They're going to talk about it when they meet their counterparts in international fora. So what has happened in Africa, because we have not put enough value to our natural resources, it's not getting the right political will around these issues. So demand will be reduced by what we do here and what we make happen in those countries that are using our ivory.
Alejandro, what are some of these solutions in your view? Because clearly there are several challenges, but when he brings up the issue of political will, there's also the issue of corruption, both on the ground and higher up. How do we address these issues?
Well, one of the ways in which you control corruption is when you decide to collapse a market, and all of the parasites living out of corruption in this segment of the economy, that will dry up and they will disappear. So one of the things that we need to remember, coming back to CITES, is that when you decide to make a one-off sale of ivory and you put, 100 tons of ivory into the market, immediately you have created the fuel to set up institutions that are called outlets, carvers, processors, traders, maybe even small retail banks that finance operations. So you set up a whole series of an ecosystem of institutions. Okay, now get rid of that. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult. You effectively, what CITES did with those one-off sales is you locked in the ivory, the world of ivory, you locked it into a trajectory of poaching and trafficking and trade, okay? Because you create institutions that will be very difficult to get rid of in the future. This is why in our economic analysis we call that lock-in trajectory. It's very difficult to wiggle out of that thing and move away from that thing, okay? So I think the basic solution is, if you have enough information to say, we don't know enough about the dynamics of this market, if you know that, then by the precautionary principle, you should not initiate or legalize a market. That's very, very clear. Now, that's in a way that's a negative solution, but that is something that we need to keep in mind.
Okay. Patrick, the CITES convention is coming up later on this year. What do we expect from that convention, and does Kenya perhaps have any proposals?
Definitely, as a country, our populations of rhinos are on Appendix 1, the highest level of protection, and we'll like to maintain the listing of the African elephant and the rhinos on Appendix 1 of CITES. And there should remain a total ban in the sale of rhino horn and elephant ivory until we see the issue of poaching and the laundering, the illegal trade in these two species controlled. They are out of control now. It's the best time to put these two species on the highest level of protection under CITES Convention. There are other considerations. There are other emerging species we don't talk about, like the pangolins, which becomes like a delicacy in the Asian countries. And it's also a species that we think should be given the highest level of protection.
Patrick is absolutely right. For me, it's the domestic ivory markets. I think that those markets need to be closed. They need to close, and I think that the countries that have indicated that they want to close their markets, especially the big guys, China, the US, they need to lead from the front by making sure that they propose closure of domestic markets at CITES. And countries like Kenya that have shown great leadership in this particular issue need to see those countries that have driven the demand taking an important position at CITES. It's not enough for them to profess that they're going to close domestic ivory markets as an internal policy. They need now to bring it to the level of CITES and say closure of domestic markets is actually built into the CITES resolutions.
Exactly.
So we are attacking this thing from the supply side and the demand side. Those domestic markets just need to close.
Talk about corruption. As long as there is market and prices are being offered, it is a big challenge. And that is why sometimes, having worked with the service for a long time, the service cannot pay us enough to what the poacher offers or what the traffickers offer, because they're in huge, big business. And is what, for example, our law enforcement academy now trains passion, because you won't beat them. We have instances where our rangers has been offered 500,000 shillings just to give a GPS coordinate of a rhino in one of our private conservancy, and he said no. That 500,000, he might not earn it in his lifetime of work. So if you don't have that passion, you will be tempted to do it. And that is why the law enforcement wing of KWS, we work in synergy with the other one, but our attempt now is to build passion. Love that animal, that you can die for it, because you know its value.
Well, at the end of April, there is a big plan for the country to burn its stockpile of ivory. Alejandro, does that make economical sense?
I think it is, because you will be sending a signal that runs exactly contrary to what I was saying a while ago. Instead of building all sorts of institutions for a market that will, take you well into the future, here you're saying, no, we're not going down that road. We're going to close this. So don't have any expectations that there will be a market and with opportunities for profits and corruption, etc., because that is not the road we're going to be taking. We're getting rid of this material. We're also sending a very crucial message from my perspective, that this is not a commodity. This is something that is priceless, okay? And you have to really understand this concept. It does not have a price. It does not enter the economic space as a commodity. It is not a commodity. So get rid of that idea in your head, and yes, we can put it into the sky. I think it's a beautiful ceremony. I wish I could be here.
Winnie, what do you think? What does it signify?
I really cannot wait to see. I think we're going to have 10 fires, close to 10 times of what we burnt last year in April. And I think it's a really great decision that our president made, that we are going to show the world that ivory, we cannot put a price to it. We need to destroy it. I think that African countries have been encouraged to put ivory out of the market. And we've seen these fires going across Africa. Many African countries will ban what they call contraband. Kenya is banning everything.
That's right.
And I think that that leadership that is being shown by Kenya needs to go down in history as one of the greatest statements ever made for a species. We are not saying we are a wealthy nation. We are not saying that we have all the economic resources we need to drive our economy. We are not saying that, suddenly we've got all this money we can afford. No, we are saying this. We have been gifted as a country with a fantastic resource. Millions of evolution have gifted us with this fantastic animal. Someone takes the tusks and goes to make trinkets, and we are saying, no, that equation stops here with a fire.
Exactly.
And I want to ask fellow Kenyans, let's not get confused by this economic arguments and say, we could sell it. If we do that, we start that cycle of madness that is going to kill the last elephant. And I don't think, Smriti, that you are ready to show your children photographs of elephants. I'm certainly not ready to show my grandchildren photographs of elephants. I'm waiting for grandchildren now.
Some very optimistic and passionate outlooks there, Patrick. But have these bans in the past made a difference? And will this ban really, really create a change in attitude in your point of view?
Kenya was the first country to do an ivory ban in 1989 with a clear message to the world that ivory belongs to elephants and it has no economic value when it's out. And it sent a good message, and together with other countries, US, Tanzania, then 1989 elephants were put into highest level protection. We made an appeal that yes, we are destroying the trophies then, but help us conserve the living elephant, the living rhino. There are many challenges from climate change, loss of range, and we'll need resources. As we ban, we are sending a message that we are committed to conserving this natural resource for the future. So we believe we will still get partners that shares the same philosophy to help us serve the living elephants. Poachers and traders are very sophisticated. It is an investment to fight them. They have satellite phones, they have the highest technology on seeing at night. They see at night, and they are interconnected. These are transnational criminals. So it requires huge investment. Our appeal will still be straight, that will still require a lot of investment to conserve what we currently have. And we can make it if we all join together.
All right, thank you all so much. Appreciate your
Thank you
time.
very much.
Professor Alejandro, Dr. Winnie and Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is NTV Wild Talk. That's it for this conversation. But before we close, here's what's coming up on the NTV Wild documentary series on Saturday night.
The insects that build these mounds don't look very interesting. They certainly don't look like a creature that dominates much of Africa, both in terms of numbers and their effect upon the landscape. Termites are blind, but they create some of the world's most graceful architecture. Where there is heavy rainfall, they deflect it with their own umbrellas. Where it is oven hot, they carry off the heat through tall chimneys. In the Pokot tribe of northern Kenya, termite mounds are individually owned by the men and are passed on to their sons just like any other possession. This is the story of those incredible castles of clay.
Well, that's it on this episode of NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Thanks very much for watching. See you again next Tuesday at 10 p.m.